Hi, this is Gene Monterastelli, the editor of TappingQA.com, and today I have for you is an interview with my buddy Ron Ball. And what we do is we talk about how you can use tapping and EFT to help manage stress in your daily life. Stress is something we experience every day, and if you just take a little time every single day doing a little tapping, it's going to make a huge difference. Remember, you can check out this full interview and over 100 other free audios at TappingQA.com/podcast. Enjoy this interview with Ron. Overstress seems to be a fact of the modern world. In two recent studies, it was demonstrated that 60 to 90% of all doctors' visits are stress-related, cannot be properly diagnosed for their cause, and cannot be treated in that doctor's visit with medication or procedure. And so today's guest, Ron Ball, is going to speak specifically to the nature of stress, how it affects us, and what we can do to help manage that stress so it doesn't affect us in the long term. To start out, I asked Ron what got him so interested in trying to understand how stress affects the body and what we can do to manage that stress to improve our health.
Gene, 7 years ago, I was a high-technology executive. I was the vice president of marketing at a software company, and I had been in high-technology marketing for about 15 years. High technology is very cyclical. You got a lot of ups and downs, uncertainties, and I was feeling very stressed. I had a staff that was pretty stressed. At the same time, my younger daughter was going through some stressful things in high school, and my dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And I thought, well, what's out there to help me and my family other than prescription drugs? And it's almost like that created the need for me to explore that. If I wasn't spurred by that, I might have never discovered, for example, emotional freedom techniques. And I went out and I looked to see what was out there, and I found out, as you probably know, Gene, there's a lot of things out there that the general public doesn't know about. I stumbled across a thing called EFT through a guy named Don Blackerby who worked with a lot of kids, teaching them how to really love learning, especially in high school. And he was talking about this technique where he tapped on his fingers to do this technique to relieve emotional issues. And I thought, well, that's pretty unusual. How could that possibly help? Logically, I couldn't understand how it helped. When I looked at it, I thought, well, this guy is pretty reputable. Maybe I'll study this more. And I got Gary Craig's DVDs, which were the primary way of learning back then. They weren't even DVDs. They were VHS tapes. And I studied all of them. Then I went to one of his programs and another one with Carol Look. And I just really dove into it and subsequently did a book on it. And one of the things that I really locked on to stress for, Gene, is because I realized what it did. I would say to anybody, the most important reason to learn EFT is to use it to relieve and manage your stress, because stress will have a tremendous impact on your physical and emotional well-being over time. And as I've studied this more and more, it's just amazing what stress overload does to people. And I specifically say stress overload. We're not going to get away from having stress in our lives. Actually, you need some. But that's how I jumped into stress, and that's how I got my passion, because I realized what it does to people and why people need to learn tools for managing and relieving their stress.
Now, the word stress is something that, we banter around a lot. I feel so stressed out. There's stress pushing me here, pushing me there. What do you mean when you talk about stress?
Well, years ago, it used to be called pressure. People were feeling pressure. But stress is really, and it's all perception. Stress is all my perception of outside factors and how they affect me. And if I have an emotional or energetic response that causes, I would say, a conflict inside of me, then I'm feeling this tension or stress. Now, physically, what happens with stress is as soon as you have stress, you're releasing chemicals in your body. There are over 1,000 chemicals that go throughout your body. The real key one is going to really affect you, and that's cortisol. That cortisol is good to a certain degree, but if you get too much in your body, it can cause inflammation and wear and tear on your body over time.
And so you talked about in the beginning of that answer this idea that it's a perception that we become stressed because the way we're perceiving what's going on, and then you talked about this physiological component to that. Is the physiological component a direct response to that interpretation of the circumstance as it being something that causes us problems?
It is. It's called the flight or fight response. And we're hardwired for this. Either we're going to fight against whatever outside thing is there, or we're going to run away from it. Now, the problem is, most of the time it's not a physical thing. If there was an actual physical thing that was happening, I would probably want to take flight from it. Most of these are social or psychological things that happen to us, like I have to get this report done, or I have to take my kids here and I don't have enough time. So that's really the issue, is how do we manage these perceived, if you want to call them threats or tensions in our lives.
Now, when I think of that, and I hear you talking about, I feel stressed because I need to get something done, I think back to my old college roommate who inevitably did everything at the last minute because he said, I work better under pressure. And I'm not sure if that was an excuse or reality. Not with his experience with standing, is all stress bad for us?
All stress is not bad for us. There is actually good stress called eustress, E-U-S-T-R-E-S-S. And that's when you're excited or motivated to do something. Let's say you have a wedding that you're planning, or you have a business that you're working on, a new product. Things that get you motivated and excited. It's when we feel overloaded or we have this overbearing pressure on us that we get into stress overload mode. And that's where you have the real problems. If you didn't have any stress in your life, you would just be kind of going along, everything is just great, and not having the motivation to move through life towards things that you want. So, again, there's a good stress, eustress, and the opposite is distress. And distress is a thing that can cause all the damage.
And so when we're talking about this idea of distress, is there a single type of distress? Are there grades of distress? Is there distress that comes and goes? I mean, is it all the same?
Yeah, I think that is really depending on the person, because I could have one thing that really stresses me out, and you could have five that don't even bother you. Again, it's my perception that we could take the same issue and be stressed out by more. I think it is shades of gray, but more than anything else, it really depends on the person and how they perceive things. Typically, beliefs come into play, Gene. If I believe life should be a certain way and it isn't, and I want life to change to match up to my beliefs, and I'm not flexible, I'm going to feel a lot more stress.
Okay. So we're dealing with it as we look at this idea of distress. And there are moments where I can feel stress that lasts for a moment. And then there are other things. I have something that's coming 6 weeks from now. And I can have that sense of pending doom that's kind of looming over me all of the time. What are the physical and the emotional consequences of that?
Well, the physical and emotional consequences, besides the simple solution, is to start to take action, some simple action towards that, instead of letting it become this image inside of us and how it's kind of piles up. But what happens is, I mean, let's just say what happens with stress on the brain. You could start to get depression over it, that you have this big thing that you've got to take care of. It could affect your memory and concentration, and that's what happens. I'm jumping back to your other question about someone studying, your roommate studying. The best state for studying is when you do it in chunks, when you're in a relaxed state, when you do it for a while, you walk away, you play, relax, come back and do it again. When we get overloaded, what happens, first of all, is adrenaline kicks in, we think this is just great, but over time, we start to get almost a brain fog because these other chemicals in our body start to affect us, and we start to make bad decisions. So that's what happens to our brains. I mean, as far as your heart, you can have, you get high blood pressure, poor circulation. You could have digestive problems. For example, with irritable bowel syndrome, which has become more common, what happens is, let's say that you've just had a meal or something, and your body is using all your energy to do the digestive process, and then some stressor comes in of your boss says we have to get a certain budget done, then your body is going into the other mode of shutting down the digestive system. What to do? It has to flush it out with water, and that's how we get into irritable bowel syndrome, just a simple example of what stress does to our bodies, and we're not aware of it. So instead of using techniques like EFT to deal with it, we got to go out and say, okay, let's find a pill that will solve it. And if people just learn some of these basic techniques, they wouldn't have to do that.
What are some of the other physiological symptoms that come along with chronic stress besides GI tract issues?
Sure. Well, for example, I mean, fatigue, low energy, that's when stress affects your glands. You could get asthma from it. It can affect shallow breathing, hyperventilation. There's a connection between stress and osteoporosis, stiff joints, inflammation, and that's what happens, particularly, Gene, with the cortisol dripping over time in your body. It causes that inflammation inside your body, into your organs and your system. And that's the real culprit when it comes to heart disease, that over time that has a great effect. There's been some coverage in the news lately about also emotions such as anger. If someone actually has heart issues, there's 8 to 10 times more likely they're going to have a heart attack because of anger. And that's where the tie-in and the beauty of EFT comes into play, of helping to relieve issues like anger or other emotional factors.
Are things like anger and frustration symptoms of stress as well?
Yes, yes.
And how does that happen?
Well, for example, the anger is or the frustration is, I don't know how to deal with this outside stressor.
Okay.
So I react by exploding or tightening up my body, and the anger or the frustration shows up in parts of my body. And that's a real important thing when stress shows up. How do you know stress is showing up? Because I could be on autopilot, my mind is racing with these negative thoughts, or it could be showing up. It used to show up for me right in my shoulders and my back. And one of the things I used to do before I ever learned how to do EFT, I just start to notice it. And I just noticed it, and sometimes it would dissolve by my noticing it.
I was recently rereading The Relaxation Response, a book I'm sure you're pretty familiar with. And something that struck me inside of it, that he cited 2 studies, both of which put between 60 and 80%. They had done studies. One was a military study and one was a study with the general public, where they were showing that between 60 and 80% of doctor visits were undiagnosable in the moment. There was nothing the doctor could do in that particular time because of what had happened, and more than likely the symptoms had been stress-related. Are you familiar with studies like that? Is that something that rings true with the work you've done?
From the things I've seen, it's even higher than that. And the real challenge for the general public, because unfortunately in America, we almost revere stress. Like, right. Especially males. It's like, well, Gene, I'm more stressed out than you. I'm traveling more than you. I got all these pressures. And we almost revere it because we have not made the connection between health and stress. We really haven't made that connection, because once you make that connection, lights go off really quickly and say, boy, I got to do something about this, because pay me now or pay me later. Do something about stress now, or it will have a cumulative effect that may not happen for 3-5 years, but it will impact your body in some way.
So it sounds like that if, I have chronic problems going on, stiff back, trouble in the morning, low energy, that if I take whatever tool set it is, EFT or something else, and use it to address the stress that's in my life instead of addressing the symptoms that are happening, that there's a pretty high probability that some of these physiological symptoms are going to melt away as well? Yes.
You can't do anything unless you're the head of the Federal Reserve, you can't do much about what's going on economically in the world or all the outside factors. In a company, you can't do much about what the company culture is and how to change things in there. And you might have a boss that isn't the boss that you particularly admire or like, and you feel stressed from that. You can't necessarily change that. What you can change, what you have the power to change, is how you perceive things that affect you on a day-to-day basis, minute-by-minute basis. And I can change that by using some of the cutting-edge tools like EFT, Sedona method, heart math, Z-point process. There are a lot of techniques out there, and all of them are simple. All of them are easy to learn. All of them are free to learn the basics. That's what that really shocked me, is these things aren't expensive to learn. They're available to everybody once someone puts aside their beliefs of how things ought to work. Because we're taught that everything has to work by a pharmaceutical solution, a pill or shot or whatever. And that's not necessarily the case when you get into really finding out that we have energy that runs throughout our body, and when we can balance that energy, it will affect our health. It will affect our stress.
So assuming that someone has taken the time and they've learned the basics of EFT, they've downloaded the manual, they've looked at somewhere on a website, and there's just a number of them where we can learn the basic recipe. Once a person has that basic knowledge of EFT, how would you recommend to them that they would then use EFT to approach stress-related issues in their life?
Well, a couple things, Gene. What I'd recommend people do is do EFT as a morning ritual, 5-10 minutes in the morning of things that are impending that you believe mentally can stress you out. Do EFT and do setup statements on those things that you perceive are going to stress you out through the day. At the end of the day, do another 5 to 10 minutes of EFT on things that stressed you out and release them before you go to bed. And it's important when you go to bed, make sure that you go to bed in a calm state and you're not having a lot of negative influences through television or some other stimulant that gets you kind of in a negative state. So release it. Also, on your way home, use EFT in the car or however you're getting home to release whatever has stressed you out throughout the day and as you're driving. But again, that's something that everybody can learn how to do. I'll jump to another thing. Let's say you're stressed out at work, you're having a situation with your boss. If you started doing EFT in front of your boss tapping away, he would wonder what you're doing. So in a case like that, you can use the finger points and be pretty unobtrusive, do the finger points, or you can imagine it after that person has left and do EFT in your mind, or go in a secluded place and actually do the physical tapping. These are ways to do it. It's important when you're stressed to notice, again, I said before, am I having racing thoughts? For example, if I had racing thoughts, I would say a setup statement of, even though I have all these thoughts racing in my mind, I deeply and completely accept myself. Or I choose to find myself instantly relaxed about these thoughts. Or if it's a stressor in your body, mine was in the shoulder, even though it might be I don't want to shoulder this responsibility, I deeply and completely accept myself. Notice where the physical issue is and how that ties into your work. Maybe I'm getting tension in my neck because I feel like I'm sticking my neck out, or I'm up to my neck in these projects. That's where you can use these setup phrases on the specific thing.
And in the description, the way you did that, when you talked about at the beginning of my day, looking at the things that are going to stress me out. At the end of my work day and at the end of my full day, taking a look back at all the things that have caused me issues. When I look at the things that come up and try and understand, maybe physiologically, it's telling me this story. It sounds like in those descriptions that the first key point is actually carving out some time and giving ourselves a chance to think about what are the things that could be causing us stress or have caused us stress, which then gives us the avenue to deal with it. Is that accurate?
Accurate. Exactly right.
And so it comes from the sense of the first thing we need to do is we need to understand that stress is a reality in our lives. And if we could, and that stress can affect us. And so what we need to do is we need to make sure we are regularly, the same way that we regularly take time to do maintenance on our teeth or something like that, taking a look to see what that stress is so that every single day we're not letting it build up so it becomes chronic, which creates this cascade of physiological effects.
Right. And I want to tell people we're not asking people to take 30 minutes or an hour. We're taking 5 or 10 minutes a couple times a day.
It's really just that simple, just a few minutes in the morning and a few in the evening?
If you get into doing that as a routine habit, you'll be amazed at what it can do for you as regarding stress. I want to say one thing, Gene, because I think it's really critically important. If someone is a parent, an aunt, an uncle, grandparent, it's really important to teach children how to do these techniques like EFT. children and teenagers really are in a tough situation because they're more stressed than ever before. And research has shown that stress actually causes the neurons, the brain cells, to shrink if people are too stressed out. Even in developing brain, let's say in the womb, stress can have an impact. That is pretty shocking to think prenatal stress can change your brain forever. But that's one of the scientists at the University of California has said that stress changes how genes are expressed throughout your whole life. In other words, if a child 2-3 years old is stressed, that will have an impact on them throughout their life. So it's really important to teach children how to deal with stress.
Do you have any recommendations then on how to introduce stress relieving techniques to children or teens?
Well, I've found that you kind of make a game of it with the children, and with the teens, you got to really find out what is an important thing for them that's really something that you can leverage on for them. Because the idea of tapping for a teenager, that's where you're at the age of what's cool and what's not.
Right.
But if you can show somebody that they can get a result from it, I mean, that's where I work mostly with business executives. And if you can show you can get a result from it, they're pretty open-minded to anything.
Right, because they're just looking at results and bottom line.
They're looking at, I mean, that's the thing in the business. It's all based on results. If you can show me measurable results, you've got my attention.
Right.
I mean, and typically the way to do it with business executives is a lot of them play golf. And
right.
You can say, how would you like to affect your golf game and take it down in a few strokes?
Right, the really important things in their life, right?
What's important to them, not what's important to me. I know when I first learned EFT 7 years ago, I rushed out and told everybody in my family. I was running around, hey, you've got to try this thing. And what I found out is that energy was kind of pushing people back. It was too unusual for them. And the idea of you could get results by tapping and get results quite often on the spot was too hard from their belief system. And what I learned is just to put it out there, and if it was something that fit with them, that they're interested in, then great. If not, it'll just go over their head like a cloud. It won't make any sense to them, so don't ever try to push it on anybody. And there's an interesting thing that anything new is usually met with resistance, and there's the early adopters and the innovators that embrace it. That's probably only 16% of the population. So you're probably going to find out, and that's changing now, but when I started 7 years ago, it's maybe 1 or 2 people out of 10 would even be interested.
Right.
Again, that's changing.
Yep. Is there anything else that you'd want to add to someone who's just realized that stress is an issue in their life and I now need to be dealing with it, away from the fact that I need to be just taking some time every single day?
It's just the message that stress, as you study it and find out the impact that it has on your life, not only that, it's your relationships with your family. Wouldn't it be great to leave stress at work or leave it in the car as you're going home, so that when you go home and you're with your family, you're 100% there when you get home? And I years ago when I was living in Los Angeles, I'd drive about an hour and a half drive home, and I didn't have EFT. So I get home and I said, you give me about 10 minutes just to kind of wind down. I would have known how to use EFT. I could have used that, so by the time I got home, I was
already wound down,
to be receptive to their things that were exciting to them during the day and the things they wanted to tell me about. It's just a great tool, and that's why I'm passionate about EFT for stress relief, and that's why you're passionate about teaching the people, because, Gene, we know the results you can get from it.
Absolutely.
Simple as that.
Yep. Well, cool. Well, thank you very much for your time, Ron.
You're welcome.